I met my wife when I was 16 years old, but we got married when we were both 21 and had our daughter at 22. We are both 47 now. The way I caught her cheating was a weird day. I woke up that morning feeling ill. I almost called into work, but I went in instead but ended up leaving early. I'm so glad I did leave work early that day. My wife worked also. I blame myself for feeling ill, or maybe it was dinner from the night before or something. She was a great cook, by the way. Now that I think about it, it is probably the only thing she was good at. A huge red flag that I completely missed was her best friend Kay. A single woman and always had a different guy. She would tell my wife about guys she hooked up with, etc. My wife would claim she could never live that way, and says she's so happy to be married and have a family. Yet that was her best friend. The best friend also screwed my wife's boyfriend in college. But this is her best friend. Guys, you are who you hang around. I discovered who my wife truly was when I caught her cheating. So I headed to work that morning feeling like crap. Felt a little better after I had some coffee. I worked throughout the mornings and it's like this nauseous feeling I had on and off. I clocked out at lunch. Before getting home, I stopped and grabbed some medicine. Something to knock me out when I got home. Hoping to sleep this off. Now my wife is supposed to be at work. She got ready and everything that morning. I'd usually leave before her, but she was getting ready as if she was going to work. I pulled into our building. We were renting a townhome that had a unit on both sides of us. You had to pull in and around to get to the parking lot. And I saw my wife's car there along with one other car parked in the neighbor's spot. I figured maybe he had a visitor. But where's his car and why is my wife's car here? I had nowhere to park, so I pulled out and parked in front of our building in the streets. I walked up to the door and I hear music blasting. Very loud. I thought maybe it was the neighbors but realized it was coming from my unit. Our bedroom window could be seen from the front of the unit, and I realized the music was coming from there. I walked in. Sure enough, music is being played in my place. I ran upstairs, opened my bedroom door, and my wife was riding some guy and her best friend was there kissing the dude. I was shouting over the music. What the hell? My wife jumped off this guy, who I later found out was her boss, telling me to calm down. Honey, please stop. I pushed my wife and started beating the crap out of this guy. Her best friend started hitting me and landed a hard blow to my nose. It wasn't broken, but it had to be corrected by a doctor. Me trying to sue her and the boss for sleeping with my wife is a whole different story. Things aren't as easy as folk may get out to be on the internet. My wife started fighting with her best friend. This was completely wild. I think back now and I just can't believe that show happened. I cut the music off, told the guy to get the F out of my house. He grabbed his things and ran so fast that he took off nude. But when I ran to the other room to look out the window, he had his pants on running to his car. So he must have put them on downstairs while rushing out. I went back into the room where my wife and her friend were arguing and her best friend is saying, "You need to tell him before I do." I said, "You may as well tell me because we're done anyway. Let the crap out." My wife was completely silent looking at her friend. The friend eventually said that this was what they do, and my wife joined her in the business 3 years ago when I lost my job. I was laid off from my position while my wife kept her job at that time. I was getting unemployment benefit, but me losing that much income made things a little tough on us. She said my wife came to her for money, and she told my wife that she could join her in her profession. I asked what profession, but she said I knew what she does. I said I didn't and I've never known or really cared. Just always known her to be with different guys every time I saw her. She said men pay her for her services, mainly just dates and conversations. I stopped her and said, "So you're an escort?" She was just looking at me. I turned and looked at my wife, but her head was down. I left the house. I drove over to a nearby family's home and told them everything. Divorce, STD, STI checkup and paternity testing. My daughter was the only option. With the help of a close family member, I was able to find a divorce attorney. He helped me pay for it. I did eventually pay him back even though he told me not to worry. I was clean after visiting my doctor and getting a checkup, and my beautiful daughter is mine. I tried suing for alienation of affection. My lawyer brought this up to me. I didn't even know about it. Her boss fought it and he claimed he was not the cause of our divorce. My wife sided with him and stated that our marriage was over long before dealing with him. Long story short, that lawsuit was dropped and I wasn't able to sue him. With money being tight and my main priority being that I wanted a divorce, that was my priority, divorcing my wife. My ex-wife and her boss both were fired from their positions. I have reason to believe that my ex-wife continued that lifestyle of working as an escort. But I think now, no one probably wants that wrinkled dried up box, so now she wants her husband back. Our daughter's wedding isn't the first time she told me she misses me. One time we were all with my daughter planning some things and my ex-wife brings up, "Oh my gosh, I remember our honeymoon. We went to a hotel and a concert, but it was so much fun." I avoid acknowledging what she said. She continued, "We used to be so happy, but stupid old me just had to ruin it." I continued to ignore her and she started crying. My daughter was just looking at her mother and asked her mom what was wrong. Ex-wife said she ruined her own life and has nothing, that she's trying to talk but no one is listening to her. She told my daughter to swear to her that she will do whatever it takes to keep her family together and not be like her. I tried to hold back laughter, but a bit of it slipped out and both my daughter and ex-wife looked right at me. I excused myself to the restroom and was laughing my butt off. I couldn't believe this woman. I was looking in the mirror poking fun. I headed back out to the front room and we finished the planning. On the day of my daughter's wedding, my ex-wife told me she misses me, and being at our daughter's wedding was emotional, because it reminded her of the love we had and our family. She wishes she wouldn't have destroyed our family, and hopes one day I can find it in my heart to forgive her. She tried crying on my shoulder. I pushed her off and said, "Hey, you're going to spoil my suit, woman," and headed back inside to celebrate my daughter's day. My daughter wanted to take pictures with the both of us. I did it for my baby. I just can't stand to be around this woman and she couldn't help but end up wherever I was. I tried circling around speaking to folks, making sure everyone is okay. I turned around and she was standing right behind me. I said to her right there, "Do you mind?" She grabbed my shoulder and said, "Please hear me out, please." My daughter's cousins were just staring at us. I know they were embarrassed by their aunt. I would be. We headed back outside. I screamed at her, "What do you want?" She told me she's going to be having surgery, something about her lady parts and a cyst, but she's going to be okay, that she just felt alone. She asked if I could find it in my heart to care for her the week she will be home from the surgery, as our daughter will be traveling abroad that month. I told her I was so sorry to hear that she had to go through this and hoped it all worked out, but me caring for her was absolutely not possible. She started crying and grabbed me again, but I gently pulled away. She said, "Wait, so you won't be here for someone you were in love with, the mother of your daughter?" I said no. I asked her about Kate, her best friend, and she told me how she was in a psychiatric hospital, said she started doing drugs and got a hold of some bad stuff and messed up her brain. She apparently has all kinds of issues now and even tried offing her own family member when they tried to care for her. I said, "Oh," turned around and went back inside. My ex-wife left right after that. I saw her speaking to my daughter before walking out and wiping tears from her face. You think that was the last I heard from her? No. She even convinced my daughter that I was a horrible person for not helping her the week of her surgery. My daughter cursed me out and cried because she thought she'd have to cancel her trip and lose all the money she's already spent on it. I'm not taking care of that woman ever. She should pay for the extra care from a professional nurse or something. She's not my responsibility. I'm not at all surprised by my ex-wife's best friend Kay with the whole drug thing. I remember saying to my ex-wife once before that I think that woman was on something, and I meant it. She had this hyper attitude. She was jittery sometimes, but my ex-wife used to always tell me that's just how she was and she's always been that way. No, I think she's always probably done some type of drug, but indeed she just ended up taking something that was laced or something. When my daughter called me, she was crying, saying I was being a little too harsh to her mother, that she understood what her mom did to me, that I should be there for her and it's only right. I told her no, that that's not going to happen, and I wasn't going to take care of her mom. She has family. Someone else needs to take care of her, and it wasn't my responsibility. I told her I want nothing to do with her mom. I explained this to her, but she just couldn't seem to understand it. My daughter never canceled her trip. She went on her trip and my ex-wife did try one last time to get me to help her, and it came with tears. I got a call from her sister's number. Spoke to her sister briefly and her sister said, "I'm calling you because my sister, your ex-wife, wanted to speak with you." I said no. I know what this is about and I don't want to hear it. Her sister proceeded to tell me that no one was able to help her, and that the surgery must be done at that time and she needed help. She even offered to pay me to do it, but I said no, there's not enough money in this world to get me to help. Told her to please stop calling me. My ex-wife jumped on the phone and asked if I could please stop being such a D and do what I'm supposed to do. I pulled the phone away from my face and just stared at it. What I'm supposed to do? She has to be kidding me. I put the phone back to my ear and asked what she's talking about. She said, yes, we're divorced, but you still married me. We were once in love and that love does not just go away. How can I still have all this love for you and you not have it for me? You love your daughter, but you don't love me. It doesn't make any sense. I replied with good luck with your surgery and I hung up and I blocked her sister's number. I proceeded to block every single family member of hers in my phone, because I did not want people texting me or calling me begging me to come take care of her. She's not my responsibility. If she would have never screwed me over and if she was still my wife, then of course I would climb mountains barefoot for her. But the fact that she screwed me over possibly put my health at risk and ruined my family. You're telling me I'm supposed to help you. It's my duty as an ex-husband. That's a thing. Really? If there's any ex-husband out there and you're going out of your way to help your ex-wife who wronged you, something is seriously wrong with you and you need help. You should be in a psychiatric hospital along with her best friend, Cade, because that doesn't make any sense to me. I have not heard from my ex-wife. I have no idea how that surgery went. Honestly, I don't care. I don't want something bad to happen to her, but hopefully the surgery goes well and hopefully everything goes well. I'm not that type of person, but you're not going to get me to come take care of you, get you back on your feet just so you can spit in my face again. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Until next time, I'll see you again. I'm an assistant hospital administrator in a large hospital in the Northeast US. I am also a retired Air Force colonel who spent almost 25 years working as a medical service officer. I have had tours of duty all over the world. I met my wife, Kay, while serving at what used to be called the Wilford Hall United States Air Force Medical Center at Lacan Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Kay worked for the Bejar County Sheriff's Department as a civilian in their main offices. At the time, I was a first lieutenant and was working in management in one of the departments at the hospital. I am not a medical doctor. Kay and I met one day when I was visiting a friend that also worked for the sheriff. And when I saw Kay, I knew I was in love. Fast forward 3 months and Kay and I are dating. About a year later, I was promoted to took over running the department I was assigned to. This was also the year I asked Kay to marry me, and she agreed. About 2 weeks later, Kay and I traveled up to Missouri to visit my parents, so they could meet their future daughter-in-law. My mother instantly developed what I could only describe as hatred for Kay. My mother really let me have it while we went out for a walk later. My father later told me that my mother was not wanting another woman in my life. I am the oldest of 4 kids, and the other 3 are girls. So, I dismissed my mother's concerns, and Kay and I got married at the base chapel. Then about 6 months later, Kay informed me that she was pregnant. I was excited to be a dad. Then, not long after this happened, I received orders to Okinawa. My oldest daughter was born in Okinawa. About a year after this, Kay's father passed away, and she took the baby and returned to Texas. Her hometown is Waco. I was not able to join her because of pressing issues. Then about a week later, I received a letter from Kay saying she was not returning. Her mother needed her. I understood this, so I moved into a smaller place and finished my tour. My next duty station was Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. By this time, Kay had joined me. All seemed well while at Maxwell Air Force Base. Kay got pregnant with my second daughter. I spent almost 3.5 years at Maxwell Air Force Base. It was in our last year there that I started to notice Kay was starting to get distant. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, and Kay would be sleeping on the couch. By the time I got orders to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, our bedroom was dead. I was getting packed one day when Kay told me that she was not coming to Virginia, and that she wanted us to separate. She wanted to move back to San Antonio and go back to work for the Bejar County Sheriff. I really had no other choice. I agreed and went east, and Kay went back to Texas. While in Virginia, I was promoted to major, and was in effect running one of the departments at the hospital. I also knew I had lost Kay. I was not under any false beliefs I could save my marriage. So I called Kay and told her I was going to file for a divorce. She started crying and said no, she would be in Virginia as soon as she could work out a notice. She drove from Texas to Virginia with the girls and their clothes. Of course, I was happy to see my girls. That day they arrived, I think I was the happiest man in Virginia. Over the next few months, I spent a lot of time showing my girls the area. Kay found a job working for one of the local police departments and all was good. Even the bedroom was back to normal, at least for a while. Kay normally got home before I did. Then one day I was not feeling well, and the colonel let me go home. I got the mail and seen our cell phone bill. I opened it and noticed a lot of calls to San Antonio in it. I never counted them, but there were at least 4 calls a week, all to the same number. I placed the bill in my car and spent some time thinking about that phone number. So I used a trick to disable caller ID and dial that number. A man answered the call. I quickly said wrong number and hung up. About this time, Kay came home from work. She asked me if I had fetched the mail, and I said I had. She said the phone bill was due. I said I had not seen it. The next day I was back at the hospital and I got to thinking about the fact that Kay had worked for the sheriff. It was really beginning to bother me about who that man was. So after a lot of thought, I decided to attempt a ruse. I called that number and pretended to be a police equipment salesman. The man said the department he worked for got their supplies with another company. I asked him what his name was and he said Hank. I then asked him if he would give me his email so I could add him to my list of police officers. I send a magazine to every 3 months. He said no. And we hung up several days later. I noticed Kay was bothered by the fact our phone bill had not arrived. I knew something was not right and stopped playing detective. One of the sergeants in my department had just recently been divorced. I asked him to come to my office. He came in and I asked him to tell me his story. He told me one of the chaplains gave him the phone number of a guy that is a go-to person for any information needed when it came to a cheating wife. That afternoon I called that man and we spoke for several minutes. I told him my story and he suggested a private investigator. He told me what the private investigator charged. It was not cheap, but this man said if it can be found, he will do it. So I contacted him for one purpose, to find out who the man was at that number. All I could tell him was he was a cop in Behar County, Texas, and his name was Hank. Several days later, I had his full name and where he worked as well as his address. That private investigator did good work. Kay finally went by Verizon and paid the bill in person. I am not sure, but I think she knew I knew about those calls. So the gaslighting began. I started to be told about a friend in Texas who was sick. Kay was good at that. So good that if I didn't already know better, I would have believed her. Then several months later, Kay said she wanted to take the girls and go back to San Antonio. I was against it. Still Kay went. I called a good friend who was a civilian employee at Wilford Hall in San Antonio about Kay. He said he would keep an eye out for her. I gave him Hank's address. About a week later, he sent me several photos of Kay with Hank in his house. I knew then this is where Kay was living. I asked for and received 10 days of leave. I was on the next flight out of Norfolk headed to San Antonio. I also had that man who gave me the private investigator's information with me. It's a long story, but he wanted me to meet some other men and come join them in a group session with a great lady who is a therapist. After showing this man the photos of Kay and Hank, he said, "Let's go." He and I arrived in San Antonio and got rooms about a mile from where Hank lived. The morning we pulled into that driveway, I seen Kay's car next to Hank's vehicle. The man who was with me was the one to knock on the door. Remember, Hank is a deputy sheriff and this is Texas. It was Kay that answered the door. And once she got to the door and saw me, she started crying and slammed the door. This man and I almost came to blows as he forcefully pushed me back to the car. About this time, Hank walked out of his house with the firearm in his hand. We finally got in the rental car and back to the hotel. Several hours later, Kay called me. She was wanting to speak to me and was asking who that man was. I said it was not important. What was important is you are cheating on me and have been doing so for a long time. I want a divorce and will be filing once I get back to Virginia. Kay begged me to tell her where I was, said Hank was a mistake. And if I would give her another chance, she promised to fix this. I just shut my phone off because of the tickets. We had to wait several days to return to Norfolk. Finally, when I got home, Kay was there. The man was going to drop me off but told me to stay away from Kay. He let me stay with him and get my bearings. I later learned that all it took was 6 months in Virginia as a service person to be considered a resident for a divorce. So I filed for divorce. I had photos of Kay with Hank. Kay attempted to say we should do this in Texas, but the judge correctly quoted Virginia law. The judge also listened to my story, and the man that was with me also testified to what he saw that day. Kay was fighting the divorce and was begging me to hold off and agree to marriage counseling for the girl's sake. It took 2 hearings and a lot of meetings, but Kay and I were divorced. Kay got the girls and was allowed to go back to Texas with him. However, by this time, Hank was scared of her and he refused to let her move in with him. So, Kay came back to Virginia, where she still lives to this day. About 18 months after my divorce was final, I got orders to Edwards Air Force Base. I stayed there for almost 3 years. I was stationed in bases in Ohio, Florida, and finally back to Texas, where I retired as a colonel about 5 years ago. I got a fantastic job in the Northeast US, where I am still living. My girls are now in their 20s. They are married and both have kids now. Kay never received any spousal support from me because we were not married a full 10 years. She is not entitled to any of my retirement and lost all her dear's access. I did pay child support. I did remarry and live with my wife Judy in her old family home out in the country. My daughters over time started to understand it was their mother that caused our breakup. They forgave her for it. It was about a year ago when my oldest daughter and her husband came for a visit. She told me the whole story about Hank, who he was and why Kay broke up our marriage because of him. It's an old story. Hank was her high school boyfriend. He was also from Waco. What happened was Kay was not his first choice. He was not interested in Kay until after Kay and I got married. Then this other woman got married and moved away. Then he rekindled their romance. I never really stood a chance. As I understood, the day Kay told her daughter about Hank, she walked out of the house and did not speak to her for several weeks. Today their relationship, as far as I know, is strained. I lost my mother to COVID in 2020. I never really understood why my mother took an instant. For years I've been comfortable, even proud of the life Susan and I had built. Our jobs complemented each other. She brought style and elegance into homes through her interior design skills. And I helped people find those homes as a real estate agent. Our house naturally was a showcase of our combined talents, neatly decorated by Susan's impeccable taste, the idyllic life, or so it seemed. Then out of the blue, Dustin, a coworker of mine, pulled me aside during a break at the real estate office. "Hey man, have you been by your wife's office recently?" "No, why would I? She's pretty busy these days and I don't want to disturb her." Dustin looked left and right before leaning in closer. "Listen, I heard some gossip. People are saying things about Susan and her boss Ted. I'm not trying to stir the pot, but maybe you should drop by unannounced. See what's going on." I felt a little concerned after Dustin made that statement. On one hand, Dustin could be a notorious gossip, always looking for drama. On the other hand, something in the pit of my stomach made me wonder if he could be right. Days passed and the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I found myself checking Susan's social media, combing through her recent posts and photos, looking for a clue. Nothing seemed off. There were mostly work-related posts about our latest design projects, but the feeling persisted. I had never been the type to snoop, but I couldn't shake off the suspicion. One evening I was in our home office, printing some documents for a property listing, and Susan's laptop was right there, open and logged in. The screen displayed a chat window from someone named Mr. Romantic 77. The latest message read, "Had a great time last night. Same place, same time next week." I stared at the screen. I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. Great time last night. What was that supposed to mean? And who the heck was Mr. Romantic 77? Complicating matters. I recalled Susan mentioning, and after I was meeting the previous night, I'd been wrapped up in my own work and hadn't thought twice about it. But now the pieces started fitting together in a way that I didn't like. I heard Susan's footsteps approaching quickly. I closed the laptop and resumed my work. Susan came in making small talk and asking me what I was up to. Just some late night work. Got a new property listing to finalize. I replied. She nodded and left the room. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, it was clear that I needed to get to the bottom of this. Dustin's warning, the chat messages, the secret of late night meetings. It was all piling up. I knew I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The picture-perfect life we had built suddenly felt like a house of cards, fragile and unstable. I didn't want to believe that Susan could betray me, but the seeds of doubt were planted. Now they were starting to grow. clouding my thoughts and filling my days with unease. I knew I had to act and fast before this uncertainty consumed me. It was a Thursday evening when Susan told me about a last-minute work event she had to attend. Dressed in a sleek black dress and with her hair done just so, she looked like she was headed for an award ceremony, rather than a work meeting. Her line was, "Ted needs me there to smooth with some high-profile clients," she explained. I tried to act casual, hiding the suspicion that had built up over the last few days. "Sounds important. You go knock them dead, honey." As she left, I waited a few minutes to make sure she was really gone. Then I made my decision. I had to know what was really going on. The drive felt like an eternity, thoughts racing through my mind. I trailed at a safe distance, careful not to be spotted. Susan drove downtown and I felt a weird mix of relief and disappointment when she parked near a classy hotel, often used for corporate events. Maybe she was telling the truth. I thought that glimmer of hope vanished when another car pulled up beside her. Ted's luxury sedan. My heart sank as I watched them get out of their cars and share a hug that lasted just a moment too long to be considered professional. I sat there parked across the street, watching as they walked arm in arm into the hotel. The doorman greeted them like old friends, which made me wonder how often they had been there for a moment. I considered storming in there and confronting them on the spot, but that wouldn't solve anything. I needed to think, to plan, to be smart about this, frustrated and disappointed. I started the car and drove back home. What now? How do I handle this? There was no easy way out. I booted up my computer and started researching divorce laws, infidelity, alimony. I had a lot to learn as much as I wanted to act on pure emotion. I knew I needed solid evidence to back up my claims. Susan had always been smart. She wouldn't make this easy, but then again, she had no idea I was onto her. As I began to map out my next steps, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Susan had made her choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. And the first thing on my list was gathering evidence that would bring her double life into the light. My phone buzzed on the desk, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Susan. "The meeting went well. Be home soon. Love you." I stared at the message, the words "love you" staring back at me like a blatant lie. I couldn't reply, not yet. Instead, I focused on the task at hand, telling myself that this was the beginning of the end. Sleep was a rare commodity after that night. While Susan continued her daily routine as if nothing had changed, I was left pondering my next steps. I needed evidence, irrefutable proof that would leave no room for doubt, but how would I gather it? My research led me to a set of online tools for gathering evidence in marital disputes, from software that could record chat logs to discreet cameras. The digital age seemed well equipped for this kind of betrayal, but those methods felt too invasive, too far removed from the man I considered myself to be. Then an idea hit me. I could check the phone records as the primary account holder for our family plan. I had access to detailed logs, including timestamps and durations of all incoming and outgoing calls and texts. After an hour of navigating my cellular provider's website, I found what I was looking for. There were countless calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize, all occurring during odd hours, late-night calls, weekend rendezvous. The phone records painted a clear picture, and there were frequent communications with Ted too, more than any work relationship would justify. The next step was tracking down Mr. Romantic 77, the mysterious guy she had been chatting with online. A few strategic internet searches led me to a forum where people like him and Susan coordinated their secret meetings. My stomach turned as I archived every piece of evidence. It was overwhelming, but I wasn't done yet. One evening, knowing Susan had another work event, I used the opportunity to act. I had purchased a small discreet camera that I could control remotely, placing it strategically in our living room, where Susan usually took her personal calls. I waited. It didn't take long before she entered the room, phone in hand, and began talking softly. I activated the camera from my phone, recording her conversation. My heart sank as I listened to her making plans for another secret meeting. With a heavy heart, I transferred the audio file to my growing archive of evidence, every new piece of proof like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. But the alternative, living a lie, was no longer an option. In a folder on my computer, I compiled everything: the chat logs, the phone records, audio files, and even the posts from the forum. The sum of all these parts was devastating. A detailed timeline of our affairs punctuated by lies and deceit. And I made copies, lots of them saved in different locations. I was now armed with the truth, and the truth was bulletproof. I sat back and looked at the folder, its simple title, Holding the Explosive Contents Within. The weight of what I had to do next loomed over me like a dark cloud, but there was no turning back. I was too far down this road to even consider it. My phone buzzed another message from Susan. Hey, are you okay? You seem distant lately. Distant was one way to put it. I looked at her message, the cursor blinking as if urging me to reply, but what could I say? I'm fine. Just gathering evidence to expose your betrayal. Instead, I put the phone down, leaving her message unanswered. I waited for the right moment, a point in time when everything aligned to deliver the knockout blow. It finally came one evening when Susan said she would be late. Another urgent work meeting. She claimed this time I didn't even pretend to believe her. As soon as she left, I printed out all the evidence I collected, the phone records, chat logs, audio transcripts, and forum posts. It was a mountain of deception. I packaged it neatly in a brown envelope and labeled it with her name. Just doing that felt like lifting a heavy burden off my shoulders, but there was more to be done. I needed to make sure that she couldn't play the victim and spin the narrative in her favor. So, I reached out to our closest friends and family, inviting them over for what I described as an urgent gathering. One by one they arrived, filling our home with uneasy chatter. You could feel the curiosity, the tension. I told them to take a seat, that I had something important to share. I placed a brown envelope at the center of the coffee table. Just as we all settled in, the front door swung open and Susan walked in. She looked puzzled at first, then visibly alarmed as she noticed the crowd. What's going on? She asked. I picked up the envelope and handed it to her. Open it, I said, the color drained from her face. I thought it was about time. Everyone knew, I declared, facing the group. I've gathered evidence that Susan has been unfaithful to me, not just with her boss, Ted, but also with the man she met online. This envelope contains the proof. The room went dead silent. Is this true? Susan, her sister, finally broke the silence. Susan was speechless, cornered and exposed. She glanced at me as if looking for some kind of mercy but found none. I have copies for anyone who wants to see, I said, producing more envelopes from a bag beside me. People shifted uncomfortably, some taking the envelopes while others declined as if the very act of holding them would be toxic. So what happens now? Asked Tom, a longtime friend. We divorce. I responded. I'll be asking for alimony. Given the circumstances, more uncomfortable glances were exchanged, but no one seemed surprised. Is there anything you'd like to say? I asked Susan, who stood there like a statue. No, she finally opened her mouth. I have nothing to say. Good. Then we are clear. I turned back to our friends and family. I didn't enjoy this, but I couldn't continue living a lie. I also didn't want Susan to fabricate some story to you all. I wanted you to hear the truth from me first. Some nodded, others simply stared at the ground. It was a bleak atmosphere, one filled with betrayal and disappointment, but also clarity. That night our guests trickled out, some offering me words of support, others still in a state of shock. Susan also left, presumably to stay with a friend or maybe even Ted. It didn't matter to me anymore. Sitting alone in the now empty living room, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. My marriage had crumbled, but at least I was no longer suffocating under a web of lies. I had exposed the deceit and could now start rebuilding my life on a foundation of truth. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly knowing that the hardest part was over. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I anticipated. Susan didn't put up much of a fight, perhaps because she knew any resistance would be futile. The court granted me alimony, $1,600 per month for 4 years. While the money was certainly welcome, the real prize was peace of mind. After the divorce was finalized, I took time to reinvent myself. I hit the gym, something I had put on the back burner for years. My newfound energy and vitality were not just physical. They translated into my work as well. As a real estate agent, my performance soared, landed me some lucrative deals and even award for Agent of the Month. While my professional life was taking off, I also nurtured my personal relationships. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with and took up hobbies I'd abandoned. It was like rediscovering pieces of myself that had been buried under the weight of a failing marriage. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy. It wasn't just about getting back at Susan or escaping a doomed marriage. It was about reclaiming my life, rediscovering what made me tick and charting a course for a future filled with promise. At it, we sold the house and the judge ordered us to split the equity. We both got 90,000. My wife was using her request for an open relationship to cheat, but I didn't know she was cheating on me at first. A little backstory. I had no idea what an open relationship was when my wife first asked for one. She explained it to me as a way to be able to see other people, but still remain together as a couple, which seemed like an okay idea. I guess if you were into that type of thing, she indicated she wanted to spice up our sex life a little, which made me feel like crap. I always tried to satisfy my wife, but it seemed like it was never enough. She even told me I was borderline vanilla in the bedroom, but even with seeing other people, I still did not want to partake in an open relationship. I didn't want to share my wife with anyone else. Well, I told her that I wasn't doing this open relationship thing. She didn't like it. Then she said she would do it on her own. I yelled at her and said, "You do that. You might as well pack your shit and get out." She looked at me like I was crazy. Then I said, "Let me repeat that. You do this open relationship crap with other men, you can pack your shit and leave." After that argument, we slept in separate rooms for the next 4 days. We didn't talk to each other. I couldn't believe it. It felt like she wanted this open relationship so bad. She was willing to throw away 19 years just to screw around with other men. For the next 4 weeks, our relationship took a major downward turn. But I took some precautionary measures because my gut told me that her behavior was borderline sinister. When I say sinister, I mean she has been cold since I told her I wasn't doing this open relationship bullshit. She used to send me text messages throughout the day telling me how much she loved me. But that has all stopped. There was nothing, no affection. It was like we were strangers. When we both got home from work, I managed 3 clothing stores in my area and she works for a real estate firm. We used to hug each other and ask each other about our work days. Now she goes her way and I go mine. So with that said, I have opened up 2 more bank accounts and quietly changed the beneficiary of my work insurance policy and my private insurance policy to my younger brother. Both of my parents are deceased. Anyway, after 4 weeks of cold treatment and lack of communication, I noticed that my wife seemed to be acting suspiciously. She was getting home late from work more often than normal. She was taking long business trips for her job and didn't even interact with me. Didn't even tell me she was leaving for these business trips. So I started snooping on her iPad, which she usually leaves behind when she travels. She didn't have a password on it, but I didn't find anything on it. Nothing suspicious. Part of me was beginning to think that this sudden hatred towards me was because I didn't want to let her have her way with this open relationship crap. While she was gone on this particular business trip, she did not send me one text or let me know when she was coming back. 2 days passed and she gets back from her business trip and tells me she wants to separate. I agree. And she looks at me and says, "That's all you're going to say?" I said to her, "Yep. You want to separate? Fine. Let's separate." I then tell her, "I am not moving out of the house. You want to separate? You move out." Then she says she already had plans to do so. I was shocked to hear that, but I didn't say anything. I kept my emotions in check, even though I was boiling inside. So as the days go by, she is moving things out of the house. Now keep in mind, I don't know where she is moving to. She hasn't given me a forwarding address. Fast forward a week, and I make an appointment to go see an attorney to talk about my options during the divorce. On my way out to the lawyer's office, I get a call from my wife and she tells me that she would like to come back to the house to talk. I interrupted and said, "Talk about what?" She didn't say, but she said she would see me this evening and hung up the phone. To me it was kind of weird. I didn't know what this woman was going through. We live in North Carolina. I was not familiar with divorce laws here, but my lawyer quickly got me up to speed. The lawyer asked me what was wrong with our marriage. I told him she came out of nowhere with this open relationship nonsense. And when I didn't agree to it, we became strangers in our own home. The lawyer asked me, "Do you think she is cheating?" I replied she might be, but I do not know for sure. The lawyer said, "If you plan on divorcing her for infidelity, we need some type of proof that she is cheating on you." It was at that moment I had a feeling my wife was cheating on me, and that's why she wanted to separate, because she wanted to be able to mess around with this open relationship crap and not be accountable for her actions. She could argue, "Hey, we were separated." So after leaving the lawyer's office, I went home and waited for my wife to come over because she said she wanted to talk. Well, she never showed. And I did not reach out to her. Fast forward a week, and we are still separated and nothing has progressed. I told a good friend of mine everything that happened. He told me I needed to end the marriage and do it soon. I agreed. She was not the same woman I married 19 years ago. I told my friend that my lawyer said I needed some proof. She was cheating before, or even while we are separated, it could still be ammunition in court. Well, that night while I was at home, I researched some ideas on how to follow her or get some type of proof. She was cheating on me. If she was, I couldn't do the GPS tracker, didn't know where she was, and wouldn't really prove anything. My only option was a private investigator. I called a few of the private investigators, actually settled in on one private investigator who used to be an FBI agent. The next morning I called the investigator, told him my story. He said he could be here this afternoon. He came to my house that day and explained how his investigation would go down for a fee. Of course, the investigator had me sign a so he could begin his investigation. He also said I needed to keep this on a down low until he got concrete proof that my wife was indeed cheating on me. A few weeks later, I get a call from the investigator and he tells me that there's proof she was cheating on me with multiple people and not just one person. This was devastating news for me. She betrayed our 19 years of marriage, all because she wanted an open relationship. We made an appointment for him to come show me the footage he had of my wife cheating. It was heartbreaking to watch. She was basically leaving work to see these other men. Yep. She was sleeping with 6 different men. My private investigator also told me that one of the men she was sleeping with was an old coworker of his before he joined the bureau. They were both police officers. The private investigator also gave me my wife's forwarding address. She was staying with one of her female coworkers who I later learned her and her husband were into the open relationship, open marriage arrangement. I took all of this information to my attorney. He reviewed it and it was sufficient enough for my attorney to file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, even though we were separated. The lawyer also told me that I need to prepare for the judge to split the assets. Even though my wife cheated, the judge may order you to sell the home you live in. I didn't really care because there was no equity in the house. We just bought the house 3 years ago. I would be surprised if there was significant amount of equity in the home. I just wanted out of this marriage because I no longer trusted my wife. She cheated on me with 6 different men and then tried to lie about it by saying we were separated. That was the last straw for me. I went through with the divorce process. It took 9 months from start to finish. The judge granted the divorce and split the assets accordingly. Her lawyer tried to get alimony, but the judge basically laughed on her face and cited the footage from the private investigator. When the house was sold, there was nothing to split, no equity like I figured. And she walked away with only her car, her clothes, and some furniture. Me, on the other hand, I was able to save my credit, ended up buying myself a new home. And my ex-wife is still living with her female coworker and her husband. 9 months later, fast forward another month, I find out that the couple she was living with kicked her out. It seems she was trying to take her coworker's husband. The moral of my story is, if you think your wife is cheating, then she probably is. Don't ignore it. Take action and start snooping if you have to, but be discreet about it. I have been hearing this term for the last few months, trust but verify. Luckily for me, I didn't have to pay her any alimony and the house we own didn't have much equity in it. Thank you, Tony, for allowing me to share my story. I also want to offer some advice. Men, if your wife or girlfriend is asking for an open relationship out of the blue, that's a red alert. I don't have anything negative to say about Op. This man stood his ground. He didn't take any shit, but the sad thing is he is not the norm. Most men in long-term relationships like this would try to fix it. His wife wanted an open relationship. He said nope.